Birthdays used to feel loud to me. Big dinners, crowded restaurants, raised glasses echoing off tiled ceilings, waiters trying to sing with half smiles. But this year, she had a different idea. "Let's keep it simple," she said weeks before. "Just a few close friends. Maybe some family, warm lights, familiar faces, something real." I didn't object. Her voice, when it softened like that, always carried reason, and besides, there was something tempting in the idea of calm celebration, of intimacy wrapped in dim lighting and soft music, of laughter not amplified by sound systems but passed gently between wine glasses. She took charge of the planning. She always did, and I let her, not because I was indifferent, but because she was good at it. Exceptional, even. She had a way of turning spaces into memories, of making a Tuesday feel like a secret holiday. The night of the party arrived with the kind of weather you wish for in late spring, cool enough to keep candles from melting, warm enough to leave windows open. The living room had been rearranged subtly, cushions fluffed, chairs positioned to invite conversation, a playlist of jazz and acoustic covers drifting like breath through the air. I noticed the cake first. From that bakery on 9th. The one we stumbled into on our third date when it started to rain and she refused to share her lemon tart. She hadn't mentioned ordering from there, but there it was, the same cream cheese frosting, the same thin layer of raspberry between the layers. It felt like a whisper from the past, tucked into the center of the room. The guests arrived in twos and threes, some friends from work, 2 couples we'd met on our last vacation, and family, familiar faces. Laughter came easily, stories resurfaced, looping in warm circles. I watched her move among them, offering drinks, adjusting playlists, refilling bowls. She wore her hosting like silk, fluid, graceful, effortless. And then there was him, my cousin. He arrived late, as he always did, with that same crooked smile that suggested he knew he could get away with it. We'd grown up like brothers. He spent summers at our place when we were kids. We learned to ride bikes together, stole beers from Dad's garage fridge, broke the same window and took the blame in turns. He was more than family. He was history. I introduced him around, though he knew most of them. People seemed drawn to him, as they always were. There was something easy about him, some soft rebellion beneath the charm that made people feel like they were sharing a secret just by being near him. She laughed more with him than usual. I noticed it, but only enough to acknowledge it. They'd always gotten along. He teased her in that way only cousins-in-law can, familiar but not possessive. Close but not inappropriate. She rolled her eyes at him, swatted his shoulder when he made a joke too pointed. I watched them from across the room and smiled, because I trusted them both. The night folded into a warm blur. Plates emptied, bottles uncorked, someone spilled wine on the rug, and it became a group effort to clean it up. There was a toast, half sincere, half ridiculous. I said something about gratitude. She said something about years feeling both long and short. People laughed and raised glasses. I looked at her and felt full. Around midnight, the last of the guests began saying their goodbyes. Hugs lingered, coats were pulled from hooks. My cousin stood by the bar, still sipping. She was rinsing glasses at the sink, barefoot now, her heels discarded near the couch. I felt it then, that gentle pull behind my eyes, the kind of tiredness that doesn't announce itself until it's allowed. I yawned, stretched, leaned down beside her. "I think I'm going to head to bed," I whispered. She turned, glass in hand, foam clinging to her wrist. "Of course," she said, "I'll clean up a bit with him. Won't be long." I nodded, kissed her on the forehead. There was nothing in her expression to doubt. No flicker, no shadow, only the familiar glow of a woman who had just hosted something beautiful. So I walked upstairs, slowly, sleep already beginning to reach for me. And I didn't look back. Because I had no reason to. Not then. The bedroom was darker than usual. We'd forgotten to replace the dimmer bulb in the overhead lamp, so only the soft glow from the hallway leaked in through the cracked door. It painted the walls in lazy, uneven shadows. I didn't bother changing into pajamas, just unbuttoned my shirt halfway, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed into the mattress like a man who had carried just enough joy to be tired. The bed was still warm from the day. It smelled faintly of her shampoo, of the lemongrass candle she lit earlier before the guests arrived. Everything felt exactly as it should. Familiar, worn in, safe. I lay there for a while with my arms folded beneath my head, staring at the ceiling where the fan turned in quiet spirals. The sounds from downstairs were distant, clinks of glasses, the low hum of music not yet turned off, the occasional swell of laughter. Her laughter, his voice. They were laughing again. It was probably nothing. They had always gotten along. From the beginning, really, he was the kind of cousin who knew how to charm anyone, especially women. But it was always harmless, affectionate, like teasing between siblings. She used to call him the rogue uncle I never had. And he'd always lean in with that theatrical wink, saying, "You married the wrong cousin." We'd all laugh, every time. Tonight, she had laughed a little more than usual. Her eyes had glinted in that specific way. But it was a party. Champagne always adds sparkle to things that would otherwise go unnoticed. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I checked my phone. 11:50 p.m. The screen's light cut through the dim like a whisper. I tapped out a message. "Everything okay down there? Need me to come help?" Sent. I waited, watched the delivered mark appear. No typing bubble. No reply. I set the phone down on the nightstand. The silence didn't bother me. Maybe she was washing dishes. Or maybe her hands were wet. Maybe she didn't hear the ping. It didn't feel like a moment that required suspicion. It was just one of those quiet pauses that come after a full night. A delay wrapped in the softness of routine. I rolled onto my side and let the quiet settle around me like a blanket. There was something beautiful about the way a house sounds when it's winding down. The creak of cooling floorboards. The distant murmur of rinsing. The click of a light switch. I imagined her drying glasses, smiling to herself, maybe saying goodbye to him at the door, maybe waving from the threshold, like she did when neighbors left. The fan spun. My eyes grew heavy. My last conscious thought was not a fear, not even a question. It was this: I trust her. And so I fell asleep. Not into darkness, but into the half-light of trust, warm, muted, and unafraid. I woke up with my throat dry and my mouth tasting faintly of sugar and sleep. The kind of thirst that clings to the roof of your mouth, reminding you that the night had been filled with too much wine, too much cake, too many words spoken too close to midnight. I blinked at the ceiling, momentarily unsure of what had stirred me. The silence was too complete, and in its completeness, unfamiliar. The bedside clock glowed a soft, traitorous red. 1:43 a.m. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, wincing slightly at the cool air that clung to the floorboards. The house was still, like it had paused to catch its breath. No music now, no voices, just the creak of my own movement and the distant hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I didn't turn on the light. Habit, maybe, or instinct. I moved through the hallway by memory, one hand trailing the wall like a blind man in familiar terrain. The stairs complained beneath my feet, old wood voicing each step. But I made no effort to walk quieter. I wasn't expecting to need stealth. The kitchen welcomed me with its usual late-night dimness. The moonlight cut through the curtains in fractured slivers. But it wasn't the moonlight that caught me. It was the glow, a soft yellow hue spilled from the far corner of the house. The living room, the door, usually shut when the house went to sleep, was ajar. Just barely, enough to let the light escape. But not the sound, not fully. I stepped into the kitchen, reaching for a glass, and that's when I saw them. 2 champagne flutes, side by side on the marble counter, one with a lipstick mark barely smudged, the other bearing condensation, as if someone had held it tightly. Tiny bubbles still rose in lazy spirals, like they hadn't been abandoned long. One of the glasses was still faintly warm to the touch. I didn't drink from them. I didn't pour them out. I just stood there, letting the cold air from the open fridge draft across my face while my other senses tried to reconcile what they were gathering. The curtain leading to the living room fluttered gently, not from wind but from movement, from someone brushing past it minutes before, or someone adjusting it to hide behind. There was a sound then. Laughter, soft, contained, muffled by walls and the thickness of night. I froze, not because the sound was unfamiliar, but because it was too familiar. A laugh I had heard echo off porch walls in summer, erupt across kitchen tiles during burnt toast breakfasts. A laugh I had fallen in love with. Only now it was distant, not in pitch, but in belonging. Was it hers, or his, or that strange collision of both, the way people laugh when they know they shouldn't? When they're sharing something unspeakable, something not yet exposed but already real. I didn't move toward the door, didn't burst in, didn't demand an answer. I just stood there, surrounded by the weight of everything unsaid, watching bubbles rise in the glasses and the curtain sway like it was breathing. In that moment, I realized something unbearable. Sometimes, betrayal doesn't arrive with slamming doors or torn clothes. Sometimes, it comes in whispers and warmth that shouldn't still linger on glass. And the worst part isn't what you hear. It's that you already know whose voice it used to be. And now, it isn't. I didn't knock. There are moments in life when sound becomes unnecessary, when truth hangs in the air so heavily it bends the very fabric of silence. The door before me was only slightly ajar, but the space between that sliver of light and my hesitation might as well have been a canyon. To knock would have been to announce myself. And in that moment, I was not seeking attention. I was seeking understanding, or, more precisely, confirmation of what my instincts, those ancient, animal instincts, had been whispering all night. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It felt cold in my hand, sterile, detached, everything I suddenly was. I didn't want revenge, I didn't want leverage, I just needed reality documented. Because I knew, with painful clarity, that if I didn't preserve this moment, some part of me would try to rewrite it. Love does that. It edits, censors, redacts the worst parts of the script in the desperate hope for a better ending. But I wasn't going to allow that. Not tonight. I opened the voice recorder, pressed the red circle, let it listen, let me listen. At first, all I heard was breathing. Soft, measured, close, that kind of breath only shared when distance has been willingly erased. It wasn't the breath of exhaustion. It was the breath of intention. Then came the murmur of voices, one, then another, too muffled to make out words. But not tone, never tone. Hers, low and curved, delicate like silk. His, familiar in that uncanny way that makes the hair on your arms remember what your heart is trying to forget. And then, her voice. She said a name. It was not mine. I had heard her say that name hundreds of times in the past, at barbecues, on group texts, during holidays where laughter circled the table like wine. But never like that. Never wrapped in that softness. Never tucked into the corner of intimacy. She laughed. He did too. The kind of laugh that belongs to the aftermath of something unspoken, a shared secret. Maybe a shared touch. I don't know. And that's the terrible thing. I didn't need to know. Because the not knowing was its own clarity. I could have opened the door. I could have confronted them. Demanded explanations. Raised my voice. Ripped the thin veil of comfort from their faces. But I didn't. I let the phone record. Let the curtain sway beside me like breath. Let the cold seep into my bones, not from temperature, but from realization. There was no hatred in me. No scream clawing its way out. Only a quiet, cold understanding that something irreparable had occurred. The kind of understanding that doesn't rush to react because it's too busy grieving the moment that came before, the last moment you didn't know. And as I stood there, I thought of him, my cousin, the boy who once shared bunk beds with me, the one who cried when my dog died, the one who stood beside me at my wedding, hand on my shoulder, whispering, "You chose well." He had always been more brother than cousin. And that made the betrayal feel less like a knife and more like a severing. A limb torn away slowly, not because of rage, but because of decay, something rotten beneath the skin we never bothered to examine. I ended the recording, slid the phone back into my pocket, And in the dim light that leaked from the living room, I saw the truth not as an explosion, but as an unfolding, like a letter addressed to someone else, accidentally opened, yet read anyway. I stepped back from the door. Carefully, quietly. Some thresholds, once approached, are not meant to be crossed. And in that moment, I understood something not just about them, but about myself. That the space between blood and loyalty isn't measured in DNA or shared holidays. It's measured in the silence you're willing to stand in while two people you once loved write your absence in real time. I turned away, not with violence, but with reverence, because some goodbyes don't require words. Only the simple, unbearable act of walking away while they're still laughing behind a door they never imagined you'd be standing outside of. I didn't kick the door in. I didn't demand answers. I didn't break the glasses lined so perfectly on the kitchen counter, still etched with the warmth of their fingertips. No chairs were overturned. No one screamed. No one wept. There was no sound, just a kind of internal collapse, a quiet surrender of the architecture I had spent years building. Love, it turns out, doesn't shatter with noise. It disassembles in silence, one beam at a time, until the foundation no longer remembers what it was meant to hold up. So I turned, not to forgive, not to forget, but because I realized they had already written me out of the room. My presence was no longer a disruption, it was a footnote. A former chapter. I was the echo of a name once spoken with love and now avoided in whispers. I walked to the hallway with the weight of 100 quiet realizations pressing into my spine. My coat was still draped over the banister, where I'd tossed it hours ago in anticipation of warmth. Not this kind, not the heat of betrayal steeped in the walls. The other kind, the imagined one. The warmth of being surrounded by people who belong to you. I picked it up, slid it over my shoulders like armor that no longer fit. Then the bag, my old satchel, not packed, not planned, but it would do. It always had. I didn't take much, just my wallet, phone, and the letter I once wrote to her but never gave. A list of dreams I thought we'd build. A future that, tonight, expired in the space between breath and doorframe. On the dining table, I found a sticky note. One of hers. Pale blue, soft-edged, the kind she used for grocery lists and midday reminders. I flipped it, wrote in block letters, "Thanks for helping clean up." I didn't leave a signature. She'd know. They both would. Sometimes sarcasm is sharper when it's soaked in stillness. I left the note beside the 2 glasses of champagne. Still half full, still carbonating as if the night hadn't gone flat. I walked toward the door. Unlocked it slowly, as though making too much noise would legitimize what I was doing, as though leaving quietly made it more dignified. More mine. I stepped outside, into night air that smelled like distant rain and something else, something clean. Something unshared. I didn't slam the door. I didn't even close it hard. I let it swing gently behind me, the latch catching with a soft click. Not final, but firm, like a period at the end of a sentence you once thought would lead to a chapter. But didn't. I walked down the driveway as the porch light dimmed behind me. And I realized, this was the true ending. Not the betrayal, the leaving, because betrayal is what they did. But this was what I chose. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is not to confront what broke you, but to walk away from it without giving it another line in your story. The night didn't mourn me. It welcomed me, and I walked forward, not sure where I was going, only certain that I would never again stand behind a door I wasn't invited to open. I drove, not toward anything, really, not away from it either, just through the spaces between memory and motion, between what I'd known and what I no longer wanted to hold. The streets were mostly empty. Streetlights spilled onto the asphalt like tired constellations. My hands were steady on the wheel, but something behind my ribs felt loose, like a knot had come undone but left the rope behind. I didn't blast music, didn't make a call. I let the engine hum and the tires murmur along the road as if they, too, were trying to speak into the silence that sat between my thoughts. Eventually, I found myself on the coastal highway. The beach lay ahead, the one near the old jetty. The one we used to visit when we still believed love was unshakable. Where we once threw our shoes off in the rain. Where, years ago, I had dropped to one knee and asked her to walk the rest of her life beside me. Where she had said yes. And the ocean had seemed to clap in approval. I parked without really thinking. Without planning. The waves sounded the same. As if nothing had changed. As if betrayal hadn't found a seat at our table. As if her voice hadn't just wrapped itself around another man's name. I stepped out into the night. Wind brushed against me like a mother trying to comfort a child too old to be held. The sea stretched wide and dark. A kind of endlessness I could trust. For once, something that couldn't lie to me. The phone was still in my pocket. Still holding the recording. I didn't play it. I didn't need to. I had no desire to relive it. To pass it for clues or context. I already knew enough. Enough to break. Enough to begin. There are truths in life that don't need to be proven. They don't need confessions or apologies or confrontation. They just need to be accepted. Because denial is just another way to extend the pain. So I stood there, on that familiar stretch of sand, holding a phone that felt heavier than grief and lighter than revenge. The wind kept moving, indifferent. The ocean didn't stop to ask me what happened. And in that strange, sacred detachment, I found room to breathe. I thought of him, my cousin, the boy who used to carry me on his back across the shallow river behind our grandmother's farm. Who dared me to climb trees and protected me when I fell. Who once swore to me after our first beers that blood meant everything. We're family, he'd said, that means no matter what. I had believed him so fully that I let him stand beside me on my wedding day. The second best suit and a grin that made people believe he had known us since the beginning. In a way, he had, and now he knew the end too. Because betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes, it wears the face of someone you used to share a bed with. Sometimes, it uses the voice of someone who once swore to protect you from the world. We think betrayal is an act. But it's a pattern. A gaze held too long. A laugh too intimate. A door not fully closed. I took the phone out one last time. Looked at the file name. Pressed delete. Not because I was ready to forgive. But because I was done letting them occupy space in my story. There are some wounds not meant to be reopened. And some truths that don't need to be replayed. I stared at the waves. And said nothing. Because what could I say? Thank you for the lesson. Thank you for teaching me that blood is not always thicker, only louder when it breaks. She had once been my home. He had once been my history. And now they were nothing more than a single line in a chapter I would never read again. I turned from the water. The night air carried no judgment, just space. And I understood something, finally, fully. We don't get to choose who we share blood with. But we get to choose who we bleed for. And I would never bleed for either of them again.